From out of darkness, I call forth light. And welcome to the second Draig Sidhe Moot. I am your host, St. Parker. Or just Parker. I don't care. Get that camera tweaked a little. There, that looks better. And I found a purple dragon online. I liked it. So we'll stick it up there for a little bit. If you're just showing up, speak up so I know you're there. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking to myself. Well, thank you. I like the dragon too. I do have one. Oh, I do know who you are. Next Saturday, probably we will do this at 4 instead of at 2 my time, which would be 2 your time instead of noon. They were so helpful over on the list, suggesting topics for conversation, that I just kind of had to throw things together. Yeah, I think it will work well. That way, if I do have to work on Saturday, I'll have time to get home and be on the air. Anyway, since I work a 5 to 2 shift, the topic I've chose to delve into, because there seemed to be some confusion at the end of the last class, is, let me get my graphics up. Give me a second. You think you have everything set up and you don't. One sec, there we go. Let's give that a full screen. Let me get myself back up where I can see me. Yes, we'll be talking about the Wheel of the Year today. One subject that's come up in the past is midsummer, midwinter. Where do those names come from? Because from a modern perspective, it's not the middle of summer. Because, well, at least where I live, the hottest month is August, which is over in this area. Over in this area. There we go. I got my pointer on the right screen this time. But way back in the days of yore, apparently, the Saxons that acquired dominance in the British Isles. Give me 1 second. Had a month that they called summer, and the month was the equivalent of 2 of our modern months. And midsummer was literally the middle of that month, which they also had a month called winter, which was 2 months long. Thus we ended up with midsummer and midwinter for the solstices. And I'm still learning how to maneuver myself around all this fun stuff. Am I loud enough? I guess that's a good question before I continue rambling on. I'm a little disorganized at the moment, if you'll have to forgive me. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back with you. Okay, why did the Draig Sidhe choose to use these names for the 8 holidays, or Sabbats? Well, we were trying to get away from some of the more traditional pagan, Wiccanish names, some which were, in some people's opinion, totally made up. But we won't say which one that is. So, we have the winter hedge, which is the equivalent of traditional Samhain, and the summer hedge, which is the traditional Beltane. I keep looking at myself and there's a slight lag and my lips are moving and the voice is behind it. I'm glad I'm coming across loud and clear. And I'm glad you're there. So, we selected names. The reason for the hedge names is it is a crossing, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a few minutes, hopefully longer than that. I hope some other people show up, but if they don't, we will continue for as long as you feel like hanging around. I got a little rushed at the last minute. I had forgotten to take care of something. I had to run out of the house and do that. So the names, what we in our modern mind think of for summer and winter and spring, don't quite coincide with the reality of our seasons, at least not here in North America. Well, thank you for the follow. My daughter set that up. Isn't she so neat? Oh, you can also do this if you get bored. You have to forgive me, I'm an old man with bad habits. Yeah, I've played with it a little bit, but she tossed a bunch of bells and whistles in here for me at the last minute the other night, and I'm still figuring out what they're all for. Okay, we have the summer hedge and the winter hedge. Now these time frames are important to the Draig Sidhe because that is when the veil, this, you like my graphic? I just threw this together yesterday. The veil is the thinnest, and this represents the veil between dimensions. So we feel that is the important time for a mystery school to hold their initiations or rites of passage, however you want to view them or call them or interpret them. And a lot of things were very fluid. That's a good word. But we feel that if you want to connect with the dragons in a meaningful way for a point in time that is possibly changing the direction of your life, these are good key points to do it. And the fact that the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere are reflections of each other, where we're having the summer hedge in the north, they're having the winter hedge in the south, in the southern equator, south of the equator. Which leads me to a story. Back in 1994, I had made a decision. I'd been practicing various traditions and paths and forms of study since roughly 1975. That's always a good time frame to start from. That's when I discovered that witchcraft wasn't just a historical event. It was something that was still breathing. So from 75 to 94, I had traveled down a lot of different paths. And then in 93, 94 time frame, I made a decision that I wanted to get back in touch with my roots, so to speak. I wanted to get back in touch with what I started with, instead of all the ceremonial mind games that I had fallen down several rabbit holes looking at. So in the process of doing that, I decided, because I was going to Diego Garcia, this is a key point. I was going to Diego Garcia for my next to last duty station, and I'd be there for a year. Well, if you don't know, Diego Garcia is this atoll, which means that the coral is above the surface of the water in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So I'm being transferred there for a year, and I get there in mid-December. So prior to going there, I picked up a bunch of books from various sources. And I enrolled in this Wiccan class. So I had something to do with my time. Since you can only deal with other military personnel so much. I mean, you work with them all day long and then you go out and party with them at night. And after a while, you need a break. So I wanted something that was meaningful to me and separate from the military. So I'd enrolled in this correspondence course. but I wasn't going to wait for the course to show up before I started. So I get to Diego Garcia, and Yule's coming up on us. So I break out my various books, and I thumb through them, and I find various references, and I throw together myself a little ritual that I'm going to perform by myself to celebrate the season. And I get a bottle of wine, and I'm doing the ritual in my room by myself. And you know how you sometimes hear voices in the back of your head, so to speak? I heard a lot of laughter. And the wine was really good. That's a key point too, because it was an inexpensive bottle of wine. And I couldn't figure out why I was hearing all this laughter. I mean, it was like people laughing at me, not so much with me. Okay, so we got all these things in motion. I'm getting ready to study Wicca. I'm doing this ritual for Yule in Diego Garcia. Now, the next day I was thumbing through one of the books I'd picked up, and it happened to be written by an Australian author. And I ran across the dates for the holidays, and they were different. And then I heard the laughter in my head again, and I realized that I had just celebrated Yule for midsummer, because Diego Garcia sets 6 degrees south of the equator. So I was like totally out of sync with my reality. And that's the end of that story. So we have the veil, which is a challenge to cross at any time. It's easiest during the winter hedge and the summer hedge, or Beltane and Samhain, if you wish. Yes, Christmas in July. That is what they celebrate. If they follow that calendar. Yes, I'm nervous. You'll have to forgive me. So there are some Wiccan-ish elements that have creeped in over the basically 20 years before I sat down to create Draig Sidhe, which wasn't actually, I didn't sit down and go, oh, today I'm going to create Draig Sidhe. Draig Sidhe evolved from our daughter asking us to teach her witchcraft, and me putting down my thoughts into the book that is now known as the Craft Grimoire of Eclectic Magic, which you can either find all over the internet for free in a PDF format, or you can get it at Amazon.com. Well, I'm glad you find it interesting and that I'm doing fine. I'm spent the better part of my life being the person behind the camera, not in front of the camera. So that by itself makes me nervous. And the fact I'm just rambling off the top of my head. So the Draig Sidhe originally started out as a slightly different creature, since it was just a way to teach our children what we believed in. And then there was an opportunity to write a book, which was the original Sea, Land, Sky. And I incorporated some of the things that I had been working on in my notes that I hadn't really shared with my children at that point in time. And then after the book was published, we had some friends that wanted to know more. And that's where the Draig Sidhe was founded, in its earlier evolved form. Lesser evolved form, lesser evolved form. And then 4 or 5 years ago, I had some time on my hands and decided that there was enough people becoming involved with it that it needed to have the core thoughts brought together so that everybody was learning the same thing. What they did with it after they learned it was up to them. But I wanted them to all start on the same page, so to speak. So that's where the circle ritual came in, the being, and why it has 2 forms. What we refer to as the public version, and then you can create your own private version. But as long as everybody who chooses to perform a ritual for the public in the name of the Draig Sidhe is performing the same ritual, whether they're in Salt Lake City or down in South Africa. Someone that would see both rituals would know, hey, that's basically the same ritual. I mean, everybody puts their own spin on things. I've seen the calling of the dragons done in a uniquely different way from the way I perform it. And there was nothing wrong with the way they did it. It was just, I'd never thought of doing it that way. Got to keep the vocal cords dry. Or wet. Okay, let's get to the next slide. Okay, the hedges, as most people know, separate the dark half and the light half of the year, which is where the hedge concept comes from. I mean, we cross the hedge. When we cross the hedge, the energy changes. You cross from the light half of the year to the dark half of the year, or vice versa, the energy does change. If you have leanings towards deities, there are some people view different deities in charge of different halves of the year. And I think that's where some of the concepts get confused for people that aren't really that grounded in what they're learning. Is it, yes, it's got a different name, it's the same date. I mean, you can't really change the midwinter. It falls at the same point at time astrologically every year for everybody, no matter where you are. And the same with the mid-spring and mid-autumn. Those are astrological points in time. Yes, the summer's end, winter's end, winter hedge, and summer hedge, there are various different traditions. So we view that with a window of opportunity, so to speak. And we don't demand everybody does everything exactly on the same date. I mean, some people, that's almost impossible. They have to have the ability to work it into their schedule. We have to have the ability to work it into our schedule. And if you belong to a tradition where Samhain falls on the 3rd or 4th of November, then there's no reason why the winter hedge can't fall on the 3rd or 4th of November. I mean, to think that this information is so structured and strict that it's not flexible goes against the flow of what we're trying to communicate. The ability to take what we teach and fold it into what you do normally or other things you have learned and create your own creature or dragon is yes. So that it is more important that it feels like the right time versus the hard date on the calendar. Yes, 100%. Sometimes the hard date on the calendar is just what somebody at some point in time wrote down. And depending on how expansive you want to take your view of your workings, I mean, looking at the moon cycles in conjunction with a date can sometimes make a major difference in the effects of what you're doing. For example, yesterday was the new moon. Based on some of my, I don't know if you'd call them dreams or communications, the new moon has a 3-day window where you're basically going backwards through the female concepts that represents the moon cycle, but you're doing it in a dark way. You go from the crone cycle, and I know I have a member that doesn't like the word crone, and I apologize to you. You go to from the light crone to the dark crone for one day. Then you go to the dark mother, which is a completely dark new moon. And then you go to the dark maiden, which is the day after the new moon, which is today, the dark maiden. And then tomorrow will be the light maiden, the first day of the first thirds of the cycle. And if you haven't read what I'm talking about, I'm sure you're totally confused. And I'm not sure if I included that in the new book or not. Let me look real quick. I may not have put it in there. If it's not in there, I will get it up on the website. Yeah, I think I left it out for some reason. And I don't recall what that was at the moment. I will get that up on the website. Though it's not what I would call a secret teaching. It's just a different way of looking at the moon cycles. So we have the light half and the dark half of the year. Yes, I'm rambling back to my original presentation. And as you can see, if you try to cross the hedge at summer's end, which is coming up here at the end of August, 1st of August, end of July, 1st of August, you've got a lot more work to do there than you do if you're trying to cross the hedge at the winter hedge or Samhain. Now on to the next graphic. This is the sword cycle, which possibly the way it's written, it sounds more Wiccanish than it's intended to. I'm trying to express the concept of the male and female energies that flow through nature and how they ebb and flow. The male energy peaks on the solar Sabbats, the solstice and the equinoxes, where the female energy peaks on the cross-quarter days or the fire festivals. So in that way, the sword and the sheath, it's flowing back and forth. Where one reaches its peak and discharges its energy, then it flows back this way. This one flows out, reaches its peak, discharges its energy. Different type of energy. One's masculine, one's feminine. You have balance points between the two. By moving the sword, as I used an example of, I believe, from one side to the other of your altar, you're showing how the dominance and type of energy that's going to pervade the next cycle or the next quarter shifts. And that didn't sound right at all coming out of my mouth. It sounded better in my head. So if you're not into deities, and some people aren't into deities, and I acknowledge that and respect that. I believe we don't teach that area, we don't touch on that area. We acknowledge that area. And that's about it. There are significant reasons behind that. One, I don't feel like I'm qualified to teach you what deities to believe in. Those are personal matters. Now, if you want help with it, I've always got my opinion, and that's what it is. And a lot of times that's all I have is my opinion. And if you read between the lines of things I write, you can tell when I'm expressing my opinion or I'm dancing around an opinion. Because it's never my intent to intentionally insult someone else's belief system, even though I may or may not have any clue what that is. So if I ever sound like I'm being wishy-washy, it's because I wouldn't say I'm being PC. I'm just taking a safe route so that I can communicate what I'm thinking to the majority of the people listening. Or at least I hope they're listening. It's also why in class sometimes I don't elaborate on my answers or responses when lessons are posted. It's not that I don't have an opinion on it, it's that if I express an opinion on one person's work, then the people that are following that person think that that's what they've got to do. And I'm trying not to create an environment where that becomes the catalyst. So this is the ebb and flow of energy, and I've got to loop all the way back. Okay, let's loop all the way back. If you look at this pattern, you can see that it's reflected right there. And we also have, and if you can't figure out what the Triskel stands for, you haven't looked at the Draig Sidhe logo close enough. But that's what I was trying to reflect with this was the ebb and flow of energy. There are works, well, I was going to write that reference down so I didn't do this blank thing. In some of the books I learned years ago, there is a complete breakdown that'll give you how to calculate the ebb and flow of energy down to the second for astrological data as it flows across North America. And as tempting as that can be, it can get you into a mindset where, as one person I used to know real well in the past put it, I dissect magic down to nothing. And we really don't want to be that person anymore. And there's our cute little purple dragon again. And it's still just you and me. I have a sound clip. When we're talking about the primal dragons. Okay, I gotta drop my camera view for a second to find my audio clips. When we're talking about the primal dragons, when I originally, well, I don't know if originally, when I first conceived of the concept or awoke to the reality of the concept, this little thing played through my mind from a movie that I had seen years and years and years before. And I had to, we just have the audio.
The dragon, a beast of such power, that if you were to see it whole, and all complete in a single glance, it would burn you to cinders.
Where is it?
It is everywhere. It is everything. Its scales glisten in the bark of trees, its roar is heard in the wind, and its forked tongue strikes like... right!
Wow, like lightning.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that clip of Merlin describing the dragon to Arthur in Excalibur is kind of what I was trying to achieve when we call upon the dragons of sea, land, and sky in the circle ritual. It's more than a dragon. It is the current of dragon energy that is totally invasive and just fills everything to the brim. So, do you have any questions that you want me to go into? Everybody's got questions. The other night I was having like a 5-minute lag. I'm not sure how long the lag is here. Yes, more like the dragon. And we approached it well at the time I first started conceiving some of the elements that became the Draig Sidhe. I was also trying to scale back things that weren't in my, I don't really like to say genetic makeup, but yeah, I was reaching for more of a Celtic vibe, because after all, it was being developed for a personal practice, not as, I'd never envisioned teaching it to anybody other than a few friends at most. And that was back before I met my wife, the Weird Mother, and co-author of much of the material. Not that she wrote it, she just sat there and said, "How about this?" And then I had to write it. Oh, you're welcome to stay as long as you can. I know this is in a little bit of an awkward time. Next Saturday we're going to try to pull it off at 4 as opposed to 2. But we'll be doing it twice a week, Wednesday night, and we're going to be moving that one to 7:30 as opposed to 9:30 to make it a little easier on people that have to work the next night or next day. So you missed my presentation about the Wheel of the Year, the Sword Cycle. But you can always watch the video later, catch up on that. But yeah, the dragon, the sea, land, and sky variation, I was really in a frame where I was tired of the Mediterranean, overly Romanized flavor. A lot of the material that was coming out in the 90s had. It was like everybody was trying to get back to the Greeks or the Romans, or however you wanted to view it. And some of the stuff was, I remember going into a bookstore and they'd gotten in a new batch of books, and I was talking to the lady that worked there, and I said, "Anything new?" And she says, "Oh, we have lots of new books, but they're all the same stuff, just rehashed a little bit different." So I was looking to create something that was more me, a better fit for myself. And I'd run into some works by Eon Corrigan, where he had talked about sea, land, sky. And I started exploring the concept, and that evolved into, well, here goes another story. After I met my wife, current wife, on the internet and went down to Texas, we started having coffees with a few pagans that we knew in the area, and then we put together a group. It was called the Medessa Pagans. We even had a 2-mile section of one of the highways we had to clean 4 times a year for a year. So we had a sign and everything. But then I'm sorting things in my head. When 9/11 happened, because we had the sign up for a while, and we had ourselves established as a local group, easy to find on, at the time, Yahoo Groups, I believe, was the in thing. People came out of the woodworks. I mean, our group membership went from a couple of handfuls of people to about 30. And they just wanted to make connections with other pagans because the world was in a weird place. And that lasted for about a year. But in the process of doing that, because up until that time, we mainly did copies. Well, the copies continued, but they also wanted rituals. So we would do community rituals. At the time, we were living on a lot of 2.5 acres. So we had the room. So we created a very large stone circle. Just by stone circle, I mean we set rocks on the ground, not erected anything. But it had a border. We kept the inside clear of mesquite and cactus. And that's when I first developed the three-dragon walking around the circle before calling on the quarters. And I'm not really sure what inspired that the first time around, other than it felt right. But it was uniquely different, enough that it attracted people. And you got to remember, this is pre-Draig Sidhe. And I forgot where this conversation even started. So, the rough outline that became the Draig Sidhe ritual that's presented in the, I guess it's the second lesson now with the books, is based off of that. And at that time, we were practicing a Wiccanish tradition with a bunch of other pagans who practice Wiccanish traditions, since that's what Llewellyn published and that's what everybody had their hands on. Because as we all know, Llewellyn is God, and he decides what everybody shall know. Sarcasm intended. And I'm not saying Llewellyn puts out bad product. A lot of the product I have that I cherish was made by Llewellyn. They just sometimes go overboard with some of their authors and how they push them, in my opinion. But be that here or there, if they offered me a deal on my book, I'd grab it. Bottom line. I'm no fool. But, so the little insert where it says, you know, you can call on your deities at this point, it's if you have deities that you call on. If you don't call on deities, hey, it doesn't make any difference to me. That's where my work ends and your work starts, at that point. You walk to the center of the circle. Now it's your show, not mine. And that's how I presented it. The example rituals are written for people who do practice more of a Wiccanish practice. They were put together in rough form back at a time when we were part of a group in Salt Lake that put on 8 rituals a year. So they were mainly Wiccanish in leaning. It depended on the group putting it on. I mean, there was the Temple of Isis. That was a uniquely different ritual. But I thought it was like, you know, if I wanted that much drama and recital, I could go to a theater and sit in a comfortable chair. As you should have already got a clue, I'm very short to the point. Some people do need more. They need the drama, the theater to bring themselves to a point where they feel like they've transcended their personal space into a different space. And we are now moving into our first hour. And I've got, what do I have? Give me a second, I gotta pull up a folder again. Oh. Our shadow dragon from the north hasn't seen our purple dragon yet, has he? Okay, where's the purple dragon? There's the purple dragon. Ta-da! A purple dragon. You may have seen it if you... Well, you probably are on World Association of Dragons. I posted it there last night, along with the link to the artist and where I got it, which is a website where I go and get artwork and pieces of film clips when I do videos. Yes. I think that's something the three of us have in common. Minimalistic is sometimes the best way to go. I was at a point one time in life where I read Shogun, and I forget who it's by. They made a really terrible movie out of it. But there's a line in the book, because it's about a I can't remember if he's American or Dutch. I think he's Dutch or Portuguese. Anyway, he's European. He gets stranded in Japan, and he gets adopted by a samurai family. And we'll call it a samurai family. Anyway, they're teaching him some of the things, and there's a lot of Zen philosophy in there. But one of the things he had to learn was how to sit and watch a rock grow. Now, we all know rocks don't grow. Well, they do if you're volcanoes, but besides that, rocks don't really get bigger. Sometimes they get smaller. But it was the concept of meditating upon a rock and watching it grow that actually took me from the more complex paths that I had fallen down the rabbit hole with to a more simpler form, which was, I guess, a step getting me back towards the pagan side of the occult traditions. We look forward to your return. So I like to keep things on a simple basis. The concept of the three bowls, that actually predates Draig Sidhe 2, come to think of it. There's a lot of weird threads that don't quite line up. I was looking for three bowls and a fire for the center long before I ever came up with the concept of sea, land, and sky. Time warp. Anyway, I wanted a simple altar that, while you could add as much to it as you wanted, all you really needed was three bowls and a flame in the middle. And in truth, I've been asked, well, how do I set up an altar when I can't have an altar? Well, my response is you go down to Walmart or wherever, and you buy one of those little, where am I in the camera? I don't know. Anyway, you buy one of those lamps, you put the little tea light in, and then add the water and oil and you light the candle and it makes everything smell nice. Everything you need for an altar is there. Well, with the concept of weird, since this was not likely a harmful path, or one you needed to challenge, you were going to end up with it. No? Weird has a different story. A previous relationship I was in, we were doing a ritual, and at one point she looked at me and she said, "You need to find your weird and follow it." And I had no clue, even though in hindsight I already had read stuff about the weird, I had no clue what they were talking about at the time, or what the weird was. It took me a while to find information on that I felt was tangible, since a lot of people want to directly associate weird with fate or with karma, and it's neither. I mean, they say you cannot escape your weird, but at the same time, you're creating it as you go along. So I guess in that respect, you can't, because it'd be like trying to get out of your own way. The weird yes, that's true. I actually found them. It was at a transitional point, I guess. It was after I got out of the Navy, but before I actually started thinking of the sea-land-sky connection. Well, I may have touched base on it with that during some of my readings, since I think I already had that book. There was a book, and usually it's within reach, and it's not today. It's also by Ian Corrigan, and we've had 3 different versions of it. The original one I had, the typeset looked like handwriting, and was a full page size. You know, it's printed page type of paper that pops out of your printer. And I had gone, I'd gone on a hunting trip with my mother's husband. He was bow hunting elk. And I went up to be the camp cook, since I needed a break from everything. It was shortly after I got out of the Navy, and I hadn't quite adjusted to some of the changes. And it was a way for me to get away from everybody and not really have anything to keep me down. So I was reading this book. I was sitting on a tree stump in the forest at the camp, reading this book, and it was talking about the concepts of sea, land, and sky. And I think I'd already gotten the bowls, but hadn't connected the dots of what they were for yet so much. I think I might have even been looking for a 4th bowl at the time still. But he's out hunting the elk with his bow and arrow. I'm sitting on a tree stump in the camp reading this book. And I was in a very disembodied state. I guess that's a good way of putting it. I'd spent some time a couple of years before that doing a lot of meditation training and learned to recognize when I wasn't quite connected to myself. So I was in that state where, you're there, you can feel everything, but you also feel other things. Anyway, I'm reading. The rain is trying to rain because there's a little drop here and there. That I think it actually stained my book. And I heard a sound and I looked up and there's 4 elk standing 12 feet away in the clearing looking at me. He's out hunting them. I'm sitting at camp and they're walking through and visiting with me. I don't think he got anything that day. They didn't hang around that long, but it was funny. So yes, simplicity. I wanted a simple altar. One that you could build on for various things. We actually, when we were teaching the children, we would go to Pier 1 Imports of all places. We would get placemats, let them pick out a placemat for their altar cloth, and then we would get little bowls and dishes that they liked, the type that you would put condiments on at a dinner table. And that's what they built their altars using that. Of course, we made them use candles instead of oil lamp. At the time, I was using a unique little brass contraption somebody had made, and olive oil, and it would created the sacred flame in the middle. But it all went back to the concept of watching a rock grow. And how you arrange the bowls. I have my way of arranging them because it seems right to me. I put the one for sky, which holds the incense, on the far side of the flame, because that way the smoke isn't getting in my eyes while I'm trying to do whatever I'm doing, because I usually, if it's some kind of ritual or working, I have a script or at least some notes to follow. And I need to be able to read them, and hopefully without having to put glasses on. And part of that was just pure vanity, since now I have to wear glasses all the time to read. These are my computer reading glasses, and then I have trifocals I wear at work so I can read the fine print, which sometimes I still need to take out my phone, take a picture of, and blow it up so I can see what it actually says. Because it seems to get smaller and smaller every year. And has he returned yet? Are you back yet? Or are you still gone? It's always one way to put it, huh? Well, I need to take a quick break, and we're back. And there's the plug for the book. This is the plug for the book. I seem muted right now. Let me check my settings. Test 1, 2, 3. Is that louder? Okay. Maybe I was talking too quiet. I had to get a good mic before I started doing this stuff. And as chance would have it, one became available at a price within my price range. So now I have a good mic that actually doesn't kill my voice and make me sound like I'm in a tin can. Which the previous mic did. And no fault of its own. It was not that expensive a purchase to start with. It was something for me to learn with. And I did learn a lot. So the other old mic is the one I used in all the videos that I've put up so far, where I'm talking. It's much nicer to have a good mic, don't you think? Okay, I've talked about the circle, the wheel of the year, the sword cycle, my adventures in Diego Garcia, the hunting trip where the elk came and visited me instead of the hunters. And Peter wants me to talk about dragons and things. Guam's been in the news recently. And I spent 2 years on a ship stationed in Guam. And they have a lot of weird and interesting concepts. I've actually never been in a place where there is so much otherworldly energy floating around. It was really strange. You'd drive by a bamboo grove and you would swear you could hear laughter coming out of the bamboo. There was a real strong belief that if you were drunk and you were going to wander off the side of the road, you better ask permission before you relieved yourself, or you'd wake up with bite marks on your body in the morning. And after some of the things that occurred there, I would believe it. I had a gnome figurine at the time. It was maybe 2.5 inches tall, little ceramic gnome. And I decided to put it in the little bamboo grove that grew outside the window of the house I was living in at the time. And I had one of my roommates. There was a lot of roommates. One day I said something to them, one of them, about the gnome outside my window. And they said, "Oh, I've seen that gnome." And I said, "You've seen the gnome?" And they said, "Yeah, looks in the window all the time." I said, "What do you mean it looks in the window all the time? What does it look like?" And she described my gnome, the little ceramic figurine, only she was describing it about 3.5 feet tall. And sure enough, after that, I noticed that there was a different energy about that area outside the bamboo. I left the ceramic gnome there. I chose not to take it back on the ship with me. It had been claimed. But I also started seeing dragons in the clouds. And not just the fluffy type you see that somebody's done a little photoshopping with. I mean, a storm would blow in and it would look like there were actually dragons up there. I don't know if you'd call it fighting, but they were wrestling around, and the lightning would flash and the thunder would roll. And you would swear they were real. And at night you'd be sitting on the beach looking out at the ocean, and in the waves you'd swear there was mer people jumping over the there was a natural coral barrier at a certain point in that bay, where the waves would break and you'd see the water wash over. And you'd swear people were sitting out there on it, on that coral with the water flowing over them. And then, you get up and take a harder look, and no, there was nobody out there. It was just the water splashing over the coral like it always did. Now, I will not discount the fact that there could be alcohol involved in these visions. After all, I was a single sailor at the time. There was a place on the island I would go to, and it was one of those roads you'd turn to go down to the beach, and for about, probably a half a mile, you were driving through this canopy of trees. It was almost like a tunnel of green, and then you'd come down to the beach and it would open up. It was on what would probably be considered the backside of the island, since it wasn't where the tourists go, which was one reason I used to go there, was to get away from the tourists. And in Guam, the tourists are from Japan. And they refer to Guam as the Japanese Hawaii. But you would see a lot of Yakuza down on the beach by their tattoos. It was an interesting point in time for me. And then a few years later, granted not a dragon, when I was on Diego Garcia, I would have swore I saw the Green Man in some jungle that I was walking through. But granted, there may have been alcohol involved. When isn't there alcohol involved, right? Dragons are interesting creatures. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you just feel their presence. And everybody, I realized this, back before I knew I was on this path. Everybody sees dragons differently and has their own relationship with them. One of the path workings that is in the book was actually written in, or the majority of it was written, I want to say 92, 93. And the first time I employed it on somebody other than myself, the dragon that they visualized when doing it was really akin to the one in the Never-Ending Story. And that's how they saw dragons. And I found that very uniquely interesting, that was their connection and how they visualized them. So, what's been happening in all of your lives? Anything interesting? Don't everybody type at once. I just survived inventory, so it was like a totally energy shift at work the other day after the previous few weeks. I went in and almost didn't know what to do with myself because nobody was running around panicking. So now it's a new shift in ways to do things. Is this mic picking me up better this way than it was the other night? Been able to start my Aikido classes again after shelter in place and been doing some energy work through that. Been interesting kind of feeling the differences. Good. I'm glad to hear you're getting back into that. It's always good to make those connections. Good way to keep yourself grounded. Yeah, I decided it was time to get off my backside and start doing these, since they've been kind of in the works for a while. Yeah, we had our son in, I forget the actual discipline he was studying. He was in some martial arts classes when he was younger. And some days he was really mad when he came home. But he seemed to enjoy it for as long as he did participate in them. It gave him a focal. Boss, I don't need your help. Honest. This is Orange Dog Squarehead, aka Boss. He's a needy little dog. Alright, down, down. I don't need your help either, baby. I guess I should have developed 2 topics. Well, actually 3 topics. I had 2 topics. I don't talk as long on things as I think I do. The she, we actually use that term incorrectly. We use it in a generic sense to mean any otherworldly creature other than dragon. Well, I don't think we'd include unicorns with she's, but every culture, every belief system has their concept of otherworldly folk. And to say whether one's a fairy or one's an elf, it depends on if you believe in fairies more than you believe in elves. And how do we know they're actually different? The she are, well, they're all around us. I mean, we have a shot glass on the hearth that we keep filled with liquor so that stuff just doesn't disappear around the house like it sometimes does when I forget to fill the shot glass with liquor. I found they like a honey whiskey the best, or at least it seems to keep them out of my hiding my phone and my car keys from me the most. And if I said that anyplace else, they'd think I was strange. But I know that there are fairies around me. I've even been instructed how to build little fairy houses for them. Well, I don't know if you'd call it a house. After I did the Weird Day in the Park in Salt Lake City, oh, so many years ago, apparently I had not grounded myself as well as I thought I had after the ritual. Because the next day I woke up and I was still on that energy high you get from doing magical work. Only there was all these little voices chattering at me. And at the place we lived at the time, the house sat at the top of a small incline, and then we had the backyard, and then it dropped down, and there was a flat spot where we had our fire pit. And on the northern side, there was, we'll call them rose bushes. They're wild rose bushes. They grew about, 7 feet tall, had little yellow roses all over them. And I started hearing all these little voices telling me they wanted this and that, and to hang it here and there. So by the end of that day, there was all these little pieces of sparkly stuff dangling from string underneath the rose bush in this little clearing of sorts that the fairies had wanted me to put together so that they could look at them. I don't know. I didn't really ask why I was doing it. I was just kind of, okay, I'm hearing these little voices tell me to do little things, so I'll accommodate them. We even had a water feature of sorts. It was one of those fixtures that has like 3 balls stacked, and then the water comes out of the top and bubbles over the balls and goes down. And that was set up out there also. And we had a wrought iron yard swing that my wife and I used to go down and sit on while we burned wood in the fire pit. And I think she has some photos someplace. They actually look like dragons dancing in the fire. But I'm not sure where all the photos end up. And it's not something that you can reach out and touch real easy anymore. Checking the time. We've been running for 90 minutes and a few. And it looks like Peter had to go. So it's just down to you and me. How is the weather out there on the West Coast? Oh, well, you can have some of the rain we've been getting. It's rained so much this past month. 3rd day at 105. So we'll be getting that in August. Yeah, we're in a drought too. The weeds don't know it yet. Normally I mow the yard once a month. That's all it would take this time of year. I mowed it 8 days ago and you couldn't tell it's been touched. I've got weeds that are 2 feet tall already. And I spent a couple years trying to get grass to grow in this yard, but the soil has too much lime content, I think. And since it's not my property, I'm just renting, I decided I'd already thrown enough money at trying to grow grass. So I just try to keep the weeds at bay. They are green, but it looks like a small jungle. I got little dogs and they disappear when they go out there now. where a few days ago I could see them fine. And it's supposed to rain again tonight. Never fun. But rain is one of those interesting creatures. I've been chased by snowstorms halfway across the country. Back in I want to say 86 or 87. I could be wrong on that. I started in Washington State. I got on a bus on the east side of the Rockies, between Idaho and Montana, that area. A snowstorm swept down out of Canada, and it started chasing the bus, basically. And we always seemed to be just like a step ahead, right till, because the bus route went from Washington State over to Billings, Montana, and then we went south through Wyoming down to Denver, which was the final destination. And it was the first time they'd had snow in Denver in that time of year for years. Because the storm finally caught up with us the last hour just before we reached Denver. And by the time we got to Denver and I got to the Air Force base I was going to for training, there was 2 inches of snow on the ground. And you had all these ducks wandering around in the snow. It was kind of funny looking. It was only on the ground for a couple days, but that was in I want to say it was in June of that year, but I could be wrong. But they hadn't had snow that time of year for years, and I show them down and it snows. What can I say? Chase me from Canada. Yeah, I've attempted to move storms out of the way, or at least around me, in the past. Sometimes I feel like I was successful, and sometimes I feel like I just put a lot of energy up and the dragons are laughing at me as they push the rain down upon me. Of course, part of that was from being on ships, out to sea, playing tag with hurricanes or typhoons, depending on which coast you're on. But that's always interesting. So I'm running out of things to talk about. See if we can push for another 20 minutes here. Oh, rain is wonderful, just not when you're on a ship. It makes everything wet and the sea rough. Yeah, Texas is technically still in a drought, even with all the rain, because the rain's not going to hang around. I mean, the alley behind me will flood when it rains, and the next day it's completely dry. And we've got caliche-based soil, which is very clay-like in a way. It's hard. They don't have basements around here to speak of because of the caliche. It's too expensive to dig down into like you would in other parts of the country. It's like digging into concrete. Just keeps going that way. Yeah, if you type LOL, my little purple dragon will laugh at you. If you type song, I think it's song, he dances. And anybody can do that. You can do it, I can do it, somebody I don't know can do it. And he also has little programmed responses, like greeting people. See, there he is. He's laughing. He also blows fire when they ban somebody. We had a lot of people show up. My wife and my daughter would jump in as monitors, but since we didn't really advertise this one, except within the group. I'm glad you could come by. I hope to see you next Saturday. Still dealing with the dogs. And thank you for visiting. This has been the Draig Sidhe Moot Saturday edition. And I want to thank everybody that stopped by. And remember, if you believe in the dragons, they can believe in you. And show's over. Let that run.